All right. Every brand wants attention, but few know how to execute it at the big idea level. Today on Go for CEO podcast, I'm sitting down with George Essex from Branded Agency, a leader turning bold visions and brand execution into measurable results. Let's talk about what it takes to really build brands that move markets. George Essex, welcome to the Go for CEO channel. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks, John. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, awesome. Well, as you said on the off side of it, this is your maiden voyage, so I'm excited to have you on, ladies and gentlemen. Go for CEO community. Let's welcome George by putting a ton of views, subscribing to the channel, and sharing this all over so that George can feel welcome to the Go for CEO community. But we always like to start with kind of the background, right? We hear the accent, so you're gonna have to tell us a little bit about that, where you lived, all that type of stuff. But how did you get to SVP and now running the Americas for Branded Agencies? So we want to get a little bit of that background and we'll get into the rest of the story. So take it away.
Of course. So, yes, the accent is English. I grew up in central London, went to university in the northeast of England, and then moved back when I was sort of 21, 22, and actually started my career in insurance, which was, yeah, I was one of those kids who'd spent most of his formative years playing sports, played a lot of rugby at university, and was like, what do I do with my career? Where do I go from here? And I found myself with a job in insurance and did that. And after a sort of a year and a half, I thought, right, this isn't for me. And then I sort of found my real calling and my real passion, which was in sales. So I found myself at a startup, a tech startup, a small tech startup of about 15 people, very much working from the bottom. I was one of those business development representatives making 60 cold calls, sending 60 cold emails a day in the boiler room, and I was selling software. And my journey with Branded sort of started in 2022. So post COVID, objectively, I had an amazing life. I had a great job. I'd worked my way up to head of sales at this tech company. I had a team under me. I had great friends, family. I had a great place in London, but I was sort of had this itch to do something a bit more and sort of expand my horizons. And I saw this opportunity come up with Branded as they were looking to expand their footprint in the US and sort of launch a US headquarters. And I thought, right, am I qualified for this? Not sure, but let's go for it. Let's apply. And so I knew from experience, I had a lot of experience launching into Ireland and the Netherlands in my previous role, managing teams, go to market strategies. So that's how I fell into the role. And I think two things really appealed to me. One, driving a vision in a new country, and two, having the opportunity to sort of build a culture and build a team underneath me. So I spent the first 6 months learning the business in the UK, traveling around the different offices. And then January 2023, landed in Miami with zero clients, zero revenue, zero employees, and zero friends. So that's where the journey started.
I love it. You reminded me while you were speaking that there's a book called "If It Ain't Broke, Break It," and that's what you did. You broke kind of the norm, the condition, the comfortability that you had, and you ventured out into something new. And how cool is that you saw something that you were eager to go get, and you became that opportunity by putting yourself in the right moment in the right space. So, all right, so now you're in Miami, and you're, like you said, no employees, no brand, no nothing. So you have to recreate yourself into this new opportunity. Take us through that journey, and what were the first few steps? Obviously, from even the generic stuff, finding an office, to who were you networking with? Did you find chambers of commerce? How did you approach that opportunity?
Yeah, it was rather overwhelming at first, but I think I had to establish a point of view. And for the background, the company that I joined, Branded at the time, its heritage was in retail, very much in private label, brand identity design, packaging design, all of that stuff. So I had that incredible heritage to lean on. And I think the trigger for the US expansion for us was the growth of private label in the US and the opportunities that that offered. So I was looking first and foremost to sort of bring that expertise, bring that credibility from the European market, and then really, use those case studies and use those client names that we had, but also infuse the energy of a startup. So I came up with this idea of us being America's most experienced startup, whereby we had all the experience from previous case studies are similar, but ultimately our footprint was that of a startup. So what I needed to do first and foremost was set up a go-to-market strategy. Right. Who was our ideal customer profile? Who did we want to go after? And I'm not just saying, hey, we want to work with Coca-Cola, or we want to work with Pepsi. We're talking very rigorous, clear, quantifiable metrics of, locations, revenue, type of business, opportunity size, all of those different things. And then, trickle down in terms of, right, we've got the strategy now. How are we going to go about it? And I started thinking, right, let's, sales is what I know. Let's build a sales team. Let's hire a couple of salespeople to open opportunities, and then go from there. And as soon as I landed, sort of boots on the ground, and I really got into and started walking the floor of these retailers, interacting with consumer packaged goods brands, I said, right, that initial strategy of having sort of cold calling and everything like that, that's not going to work, because ultimately I'm not selling a product anymore. I'm selling a service. And the difference between what I was selling before is, it's easy, it's off the shelf. Whereas, the realization I had very early on when I moved to the States is we've got no reputation. No one cares. So you've got to give people a reason to care. And that's done in person, that's done face to face, and that's building the credibility and the story. So that's shifted pretty quickly in terms of my first hire. I've always believed that hire people around you who are better than you and who can add to you. So my first hire was Layla, who at the time was our marketing manager. So what I needed Layla is ultimately I needed her to work when I was asleep. And what I mean by that is not that she was working sort of 9 p.m. to 9 a.m., but building that top of mind awareness of branded, who we are, what our messages are, showing up in people's LinkedIn feeds, showing up in the places that I can get to them. And in terms of Miami itself, one of the massive benefits has been the diversity of people here, the culture, all of those different influences, which has been great. But to sort of summarize, it was establish the strategy and lean into the strategy, but don't be afraid to change it pretty quickly. And then also, my first hire was definitely marketing, because I could go to conferences, I could go to, turn up to people's offices and say, hey, let me have a meeting. But ultimately, I needed someone to work in the background whilst I was doing that.
Yeah, creating that exposure, right, and sharing
Mm,
with kind of where you're coming from. So, obviously the brand itself in Europe and in England, especially, had strength and power. So, did you use some of those snippets of success? Did you, use some of the, I guess, stories from that? How is some of that transition working now with your marketing person that you hired on?
completely, because we were starting at nothing. As I said, I had no clients, I had nothing like that. I couldn't exactly start leaning into exciting case studies and client stories. So of course, we needed to lean on our, British colleagues to provide that type of material and provide that excitement to build that awareness. So that was really, really important. So I was very fortunate in that sense. Because obviously I had the support of my UK colleagues with those case studies. But at the same time, I was conscious of the fact that, you know, whilst UK retail examples are relevant, there are only 8 retailers in the UK in grocery that have revenues over 1 billion. In the US, I think grocery wise, it's about 45 plus. So scale is completely different. The way shoppers, navigate and negotiate. And that was another big push for us to move to the US, is because COVID precipitated this shift where everyone started trading down to private label. Everyone started, that the sort of consumers became bifurcated. They were buying cheap goods, but they were also splashing out on expensive holidays. Everyone got a bit confused. And to really understand the market, you had to be there living it. And we obviously had case studies that we could use. But my big thing very early on was talk to as many people in the space as possible, understand what they are struggling with, and really provide a point of view. And this whole notion about being America's most experienced startup resonated with people, because it was like, right, we know we're big enough to deliver. I have the resources, but also we're small enough to care. And I think a lot of people really lent into that and really liked that. And also, we sort of tied that to the cultural shifts of this age of acceleration that we're living in. The fact that you're bombarded with messages, you're bombarded with sort of commercials, everyone is more distracted than ever. So as a brand, it's never been harder to stand out. And I think that's where hammering that message, saying we know what good looks like, we've been there, we've done that, and can we bring that expertise to you, was really powerful.
It's interesting. I just saw something on Instagram where it said, "Hey, if you're only posting one or twice a day, try like 100 or 200 times because it's so flooded with everybody else that you have to actually increase the volume." And I don't know if that's true or not, but from that perspective, I guess what could you tell people right now that are dealing with that, right? They're trying to build a brand, a market plan, right? From your perspective, if there's so much noise, then is it really the creativity of how you impact that person in the first few seconds, or is it the colors and the way that you put yourself in the market and places that you put yourself? What are some of those key points?
I think to frame this discussion, there's an excellent quote by Warren Buffett, which is, it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. And I think ultimately in 2025, 5 minutes seems probably quite generous, especially as we've seen what's happened recently, with Cracker Barrel and all of these other types of stories. So what I would say is fundamentally, you know, there are three things that help brands stand out. One, establish what we talk about, which is your brand truth. That is the ownable story at the heart of your brand. And that should form the absolute basis of your positioning, whether that's a founder story, whether that's an incredible product story or something similar. Really lean into that. Don't just be another copycat. Don't just be, oh yeah, we're just about this. So that's really important, because without strategy, you can't have great design. And when it comes to great design, be unique, be distinct, don't chase trends. Trends are great for activation. Trends are really important, to stay relevant. But ultimately, as your brand expands and as you scale over time, you need to stay core to who you are. But you can flex on that idea. I mean, a great brand that has done this well and has seen the ups and downs is someone like Levi's. That sense of old-fashioned Americana. And in the late noughties, early sort of 2010s, they went through a really difficult period. Fast fashion came at them. They were like, oh gosh, should we start leaning into that? How do we reassess? And they lost their way a bit. And now they've really recentered back to who they are, their place in the American consumer's mind. So, and they have very distinctive, branding. Everyone knows them, everyone sees them. It's same with Coca-Cola. You think red, you think Coca-Cola. So firstly, establish your brand truth, who you are, what you stand for, what is inherently unique to you. Secondly, build a design and identity that is distinct. And then thirdly, I think, and this is really important, is scale consistently. Consumers these days are shopping across 7 different channels before they make a purchase. And now when I heard that stat, I was like, 7 channels. Let me think about it. It's crazy. And what that means is, if you show up on packaging completely different to how you show up on web, completely different to how you show up on social, the chance of that consumer converting is a lot less. And the greatest brands, they don't just think in a vacuum about packaging or web or social, they think in the concept of a brand world. And that's really powerful. What's the brand world that you're going to be building?
Hmm, that is interesting. So let's go deeper on that. I'm thinking, like you said, Levi, and maybe it's the celebrity that they choose to work with. Coca-Cola obviously has had so many different ways that they've reinvented themselves. But from a Go for CEO perspective, we're talking a lot of small to medium-sized business owners. You kind of have challenged yourself as an entrepreneur scenario in this particular side. So what are two or three things that, going deeper in that sense, that when you're starting out, or if you're kind of just reaching that million or 2 million, $3 million mark of gross revenues, that you could do to tweak once you've already started a brand and colors and imaging and it all looks consistent? Is there anything that you're tweaking at that point? Or are you getting bolder and more open to sharing that same vision?
Yeah, it's always the hardest thing because people always like, oh, should I shift this? Should I do this? And it's all very subjective. We live in a subjective world, and I run a subjective business being in design. But I would say the best brands have narrow focus and a wide appeal. And you might think, hang on, that's a bit of an oxymoron. What are you talking about? Well, what I'm saying is they know their consumer in and out. They know who they serve, and that is really, really important. As a brand, never lose sight of that. It doesn't matter if you have $100,000 in revenue or 100 billion. Never lose sight of your core consumer and what you represent to them. That's really, really important. And you talk about evolution over time. Absolutely, you don't want to get stuck in one place, but the foundations of your great design and sort of where you come from over time, that can have flexible, but you still need that cohesion, that integration, and that simplicity to your messaging as to why those consumers sort of fell in love with you at the start. Because ultimately, when your creativity is built on those solid foundations, it can effortlessly move across all of your channels. So I would say never forget who your consumer is, never forget who you serve. Don't try and chase the new thing and the new exciting thing. I think, trend chasing is quite terrifying at the moment when you see what everyone wants to be the next liquid death. Everyone wants to be, launch the next Dubai chocolate bar. And you've got to think, well, where do I fit in that consumer journey? Where do I fit in that consumer orbit? So never lose sense of who you are. And then in terms of your design, distinctiveness is about top of mind awareness. How do you stand out? Whether that's with distinctive assets, logos, icons, colors, all of those things are important, but also, trust the process and don't be afraid to, invest more upfront, because guess what? You only get one chance to make a first impression. And if you make a bad first impression, we've seen in the news very recently with all of the things going on, how difficult it is to come back from that.
Yeah, those bounce backs are hard, and you're having to reinvest and put in the great minds or even change certain leadership at times, right? To make an impact again and kind of recreate them. I know Bud Light, when they joined forces back with UFC after their debacle with Dylan Mulvaney, it was interesting to see kind of consumers and even, I would go to a bar and be like, like probably the first 6 months was like, nah, yeah, we're drinking anything but Bud Light. And then all of a sudden UFC and some of my friends that are, fighters and love that. And all of a sudden they joined that connection and started ordering Bud Light again. And I was always kind of like, interested in seeing kind of how that worked and why that happened. So when you think about data, right, and from your perspective to a client, what data metrics are you using to be able to kind of lift their thoughts to, okay, hey, this is the right direction to take? Or is it always like ABC testing? Like, what are some things that really data analytics will share with someone so that they can make a sound decision in working with an agency like yourself?
So I think the answer depends on sort of the type of project. Is it a completely new brand build? Is it a complete rebrand, or is it an evolution? Because that will dictate the level of data. But let's, for instance, talk about a brand build. Firstly, you need to understand with the data, what data you're looking for is kind of building your market map. And what I mean by that is, one, your consumer, understanding where they're shopping, what their demographic profile is, and the need state that you're solving. And you can obviously get that through quantitative data. You can buy that data online, or one thing which we do a lot in terms of research is sort of ethnographic qualitative in research, because you can ask people online, oh, what would you think about a brand like this, or what would you think about the brand this? And often people tell you what they think you want to hear rather than what they actually think. So getting in store with people, really seeing, right, okay, for example, we recently did a project where we would go into people's houses and say, right, let us into your pantry. What are you buying? What's in your sort of consumption universe? Right, how can we fit in there? This new product that we're launching, where do you see it sitting alongside? Is it sort of next to your peanut butters and your jellies, or is it, more in the sort of condiment space and stuff like that? So you really start to understand, and similarly, go on shop-alongs with consumers, understand what they're picking, why they're picking, and really get into that detail. So from a sort of brand build, like need solving state, that data is invaluable. And you also need to understand the wider market in terms of the opportunity, because I always like to think everyone, most brands will be like, oh, there's a gap in the market, there's a gap in the market. Okay, but what's the actual market in the gap? And that's really important, because where do you want to take this and where do you want to scale? And then across the process, so you've built your hypothesis, you've built your sort of positioning based on that, then you start to design. And it shouldn't be straight away into, oh my gosh, okay, what's this SKU going to look like? Or what's this Instagram post? We're thinking big ideas that resonate with that strategy. Think of it like a funnel. Start at the top, refine, 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 refine. And then data comes back in when you do further down the line validation. And validation in terms of back testing with consumers against existing brands, whether that's shelf testing, all of these different things that really inform. But I will say this as someone who works in the world of sort of art as well as science. There will come a point where you have to pick and say, right, this is us. And it's never an easy stage for a sort of founder or someone that to say, oh my gosh, I'm going to do it. There's never a right time to launch. But through that process, you should have a really, really rigorous understanding, right? My product has a place. My consumer wants my product. And also I have a story, a visual and verbal story that is going to resonate with them. Boom, you're ready to launch.
I love it. I love it. And what a great sense, right? When you start to have these data points, you work with an expert like yourself in branded and what you guys could bring to the table. So what when you started, in the Americas, right, in Miami, and obviously got your first marketing person, what was the first client that came on board? And then what has developed since then as far as a type of client, an avatar, right, that you pursue? Or is it pretty widespread depending on when you find someone that has a need? So that first client to now the pathway of where the clients are coming from now.
Yeah, so our first client was GameStop, which was really, really interesting, because
Oh,
that's a
wow.
brand that's been through an incredible transformation journey. Everyone knows it from the sort of days of the Robin Hood, Wall Street bets, everything going on like that. And that honestly came from a LinkedIn message. I reached out to the director of private label. His name's Alex. He's a really cool guy. And I said, hey, look, I'm going out on a whim here. I've been through your stores. I've looked at some of the packaging. Like, I know from our expertise, we can help. We can help you. Here's a couple of examples. He said, okay, then I'll take a meeting with you. Who's this sleazy salesman? Come on, here we go. So I then, from that point, what a discussion that actually started about sort of print quality management in terms of like packaging, colors, stuff like that, then expanded over time to much bigger conversations about brand building, the power of private label. And why that journey was so amazing is because with GameStop, you've got an incredible consumer set, and you have got really dedicated consumers who really do care about the brand and who went on that journey over COVID and are rooting for it. So he came to me with the exciting idea. He said, we want to launch a new controller for the Switch. He said, right, okay, we want to launch a new controller Switch. I've got a name, but I don't really know how to build the brand and stuff like that. And since that journey, we actually went on an incredible journey where, you can look it up, it's been a very popular product for them. We launched this brand called CandyCon, which was this customizable controller that was really tapping into this market of people wanting increasingly customizing their gaming setups. They want to have that sense of fun and flexibility with their controllers. And we went on this incredible journey from sort of a conversation about, hey, I think the colors are a bit off on your packaging, to then launching one of the biggest controller launches ever at GameStop. So start somewhere is my advice. Pick a pain point, pick a challenge, and start somewhere, and you never know where that could lead. And it's very easy for people to chase all of these different opportunities. I mean, one of my biggest challenges early on when I launched in the US was I said yes to everything. I said, "Oh yeah, I'll take that opportunity. Oh yeah, yeah, I'll run at that." And I learned pretty quickly that no is as powerful as yes. And I think for a lot of people, don't overextend yourself and stay true to yourself. And to go back to sort of the GameStop example, that was a brand, that was a retailer who we knew in terms of our heritage and in terms of the team I could lean on in the UK, that would be a great opportunity for us. And what you'll find with a lot of brands is what they want to do is they want to stand out and they want to stay relevant and ultimately they want to sell more. And whether you're a small startup or whether you're a Fortune 500 like GameStop, those challenges are clear and it's cross category. So how can you tap into that and how can you give real solutions to that? And what I talk a lot about is branding to deliver. Just because you're a creative, you need to remember you need to brand for the real world. These are real people with real timelines, real problems. They need to get product on shelf. They've got all of these other things. Like, what can you do to push the needle and drive sales, drive revenue for them? So since that moment, that was amazing for us. That was a real sort of milestone. I kind of went overnight. Alex and I went sort of overnight famous on Reddit, which was quite funny when everyone got behind it. Still get messages today of thanks for the controller. I was like, I didn't build it. We just built the brand. But no, that was an incredible journey. And then since then, we've really specialized on that packaging journey. I think packaging, in my opinion, is the most powerful tool in the retail sales journey, because ultimately you can get people with ads, you can do this, but when people are at shelf, they are bombarded with choice and they have 3 seconds to make a decision. How is your packaging going to help them make that decision?
Interesting. So, okay, let's shift into that. I mean, that's really interesting because I had a gentleman in the comfort food space in CPG recently on, actually just launched the other week. And it was interesting to kind of see his first product was mac and cheese. And how do you get a box that speaks to someone on a shelf and say, hey, pick me over bigger brands like Annie's or, whoever that's out there at Whole Foods and some of these other places that are clean products. So, in that perspective, when you're going through this journey with a client, what can you add at that point, right? Let's say they've made a decision, they're going with certain colors and schemes and the way things pop to them. What are some of the ways that you influence them in that scenario?
So I think there's a recognition, and I'm sure we'll probably have a conversation about AI today, but
Yeah.
I think there's a recognition that as a consultant or as an agency, people are paying for your objectivity, but they're also paying for your point of view. And I think that's really, really important as creativity continues to get commoditized. Everyone's like, well, I can do this on ChatGPT, or I can do this. I'll be brutally honest. Design has never been easier. Canva, Adobe, all of these different things. But those tools, they don't create strategy, they don't create originality, and they don't create emotional connection. And branding isn't about what's easy. It's about what lasts. And I think that's really important in terms of our perspective. When clients say to, oh, we could do this or we could do this, like you've got to constantly remind yourself of the strategy, why we're launching this brand, and also constantly think about the macro of the consumer and really understand the audience and craft that brand story. So if they want to go for the color blue, ultimately, I can't stop them choosing the color blue. But I would say, right, when people look at your brand and they look at your identity, what do you want them to feel? And you can look at, and I mentioned Liquid Death earlier, that whole brand is built on this notion of killing thirst. And it's a really exciting identity because it unites both an 8-year-old in Walmart and a sort of 75-year-old sort of, resigned rocker who are like, yeah, I can get behind this product. This gets me quite excited. This is cool. And it always comes back to when people look at your brand and they look at your packaging, like in the 3 seconds, in that, what do you want to stand for? And if the choices that the client is making, we feel doesn't align with that original strategy, that's where we push back and say, hey, this is why we're here. But there's also a recognition, John, that a lot of brands, heritage brands or sort of startup brands, there's a lot of emotion in them. And I will never sit here and speak to a brand owner and say, right, you need to rip everything up and start again. because parts of what you are doing will be good. It's about, the smallest percentage of change we can make for the maximum output on shelf, online. And I think, the design agency often gets a reputation of sort of, wanting to design for awards or wanting to do this, or, it's all for our own. No, at the end of the day, the client and the consumer are the most important thing, and never forgetting that.
I love it. That you just described really value, right? In the absence of value, then price is an issue, and what you do as a service is not worth it. All these types of things. But you add so much value into that process, and the mind shifts that people are having, and challenging them. Like you said, you are a consultant at every level, right? And you're trying to put your input into what they're bringing to the table and creating this masterpiece, right? So it's really interesting stuff. So one of the things that I love to always talk about is leadership, right? So you as an individual come to Miami, brand new, nobody. You do have this legacy heritage brand that you call in the background that could support you. You bring on one, Alex, right? You said she's in marketing, and then how do you start to form the team, right? Has it traditionally still stayed with using the UK background and the resources there? Or what did you do to start building your team more and more?
Yeah, so this probably hits on one of the biggest challenges that I had, was the sort of UK US relationship. And my colleagues in the UK and what the UK business has built are brilliant, absolutely incredible. However, over time, I was out here and I was almost like a card player. I would meet people, I'd get them excited, and they'd be like, "Hey, we want to have a conversation." I was like, "Okay, I've got some cards to play. Is it this person in the UK? Is it this person in the UK?" And how you go from there. And over time, I think with the growth that we had and the new business that we had, it wasn't scalable to service that from the UK. And there were also, I think, important cultural nuances as well to brand builds. For example, someone in London trying to build let's, use an example of a, Texas Americana brand, that's quite difficult for someone to get their head around. And there are lots of cultural differences. So one of my after, Layla, head of marketing, one of my next hires was Lisa, our creative director. And for me, Lisa changed the game. She'd been working in the US for 25 years. She'd worked on some of the most, valuable, biggest rebrands from sort of Diet Coke. She'd worked with Hershey, all of these people. And I basically went to her sort of, with my checkbook and said, please join me. You please help me. And I'm sure she probably looked at me. I remember meeting her on Halloween, thought, is this some sort of scary joke? Who's this? Who's this person? Who's this person who wants to work with me? But I think what I did to her, and spoke to her about was, the vision that I had, wanting to build this business to a bigger business than the UK in the next 5 to 10 years, really leaning in and championing the sort of best of sort of human creativity and human-led branding. And so from then, my hiring process, I think the scale when we were three people, when you're not when you're not a brand or a product that has lots of VC funding and you've got this incredible innovative product, you can scale really quickly. When you're someone like us who's focused on gradual profitable growth, every person you hire is fundamentally important, and the wrong hire at the wrong stage has a massive impact. So for me, it was hiring obviously on competency. That's very important, but values. What are the values that those people are bringing to business? Because I was asking them to take a leap of faith on me, but in the meantime, I knew, and my leadership style was very much right. I'm going to give you as much as I can. I'll give you everything to build where I think we can go. And I think another great example is Angela, who's one of our account managers here in Miami. So she's responsible for sort of running projects, timelines, making sure everything gets delivered. At age 23, I met her on screen. We were hiring for an account manager. She was based in Dallas, Texas. And by the end of that call, she said, I'll come to Miami and I'll do a great job for you. I was like, wow, that's pretty punchy. Fair enough. So, next thing you know, she's moved to Miami and she's been with us now for 2 years, and she is got incredible integrity, great accountability. These things are really important, but also is very open and very honest. And I think as a leader, the way I sort of approach things is ultimately build a team that's better than you and how they can complement you. Integrity and accountability in a small business are non-negotiable, absolutely non-negotiable. Lead with humanity. We're all people at the start, at the sort of the start of the day. You know, people have good days, people have bad days, and I think importantly, be flexible. And what I mean by that is, you know, I've asked you to come on a journey with me. I appreciate some things will happen. Like, we understand that times will shift, but if everyone is bought into the end destination, that's really, really important. So yeah, since then we're now 8 people, which is very exciting. Soon to hire, you know, employee 9 and 10, and in 2.5 years, we've seen really, really, really good growth.
All right. So I've been itching to ask this. It was Layla, then Lisa, then this last one. Are we seeing a trend here? Is it the ladies that are multitaskers? All right. Is there a clue here that you're leaving us, George?
Well, no comment, John. No, what I would say is, you know, I think very much when, as I said, it's hiring on values, and different people show up at different times, and you know, it doesn't matter to me where you come from, what nationality you are, what, you know, what, all of those things. It's just important how you show up, and I think naturally the world of marketing skews more female, I think, but you know, as we grow, I look at everyone and their position in the team, and I've been incredibly fortunate to have such a great team. But I will say to you, hiring at this stage, never outsource it. Never outsource your hiring to someone else when you are growing a business at a small stage, because as I said, every hire is so critical. You need to look them in the whites in the eyes and say, right, you know, what do you want from me? And what can I give to you? And where are we going together? It's kind of a collective pact where, you know, we would have, very fortunate in a place like Miami that's booming, we would have often over 400, 500 applications. I would sift through everyone myself, sit the interviews myself, because I know that if you made that wrong hire at the wrong time, you know, it would have a much bigger impact. And yeah, I can't speak for how my employees feel about the company. You'll have to ask them. But you know, I'm really, really proud of what we've built so far.
No, and you gave a great nugget there, right? If you have these standards, then you elevate them in the conversation of interviewing to the standard. And if they don't meet that, then obviously they fall off, right? But you've brought on a great team, and obviously your leadership is important too. I'm a girl dad of three, so I'm always interested in how great ladies multitask, right? Gentlemen typically seem to be single vision, where the ladies can have 5 or 6 different things, and they do it very well. So it's an innate trait that they have. So all right, so we've gone through leadership. You started with your first brand new GameStop. You came here all by yourself. You obviously got the background. Funding. I'm always interested because I'm a commercial banker by trade, and I'm always helping clients from the debt perspective side. Have you guys thought about acquisition? Is there anybody that you're feeling like you would look to acquire, or has it just been an organic growth? And the funding, as you said, you're paying your people well, you're attracting the right talent. They're coming with some great background, so you're gonna have to pay well as well in America, right? So what does that look like, and where is the scalability side from a funding perspective?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that about salaries, because in the early days, you know, trying to talk to, so I report directly to the CEO based in London, and I'm a fellow board director, and obviously we chat as a board, and trying to convince them that these are the salaries that need to be paid in the US was always a sort of awkward conversation. It was sort of looking at telephone numbers, and they'd be like, "What on earth is going on over there?" I was like, "Well, have you seen the price of groceries, guys? You know, come on." But you know, when you talk about funding and scalability, like, I was very fortunate where ultimately I went at the start of my journey with a sort of a bucket and shook it to the team and said, how much do we get? You know, I'm launching this, how much are we investing? And so in terms of exceptional costs, we said, right, we're going to write off X amount of money to drive this growth. And that's where sort of being a startup within a bigger business was massively beneficial, because I got to sort of benefit from shared services, whether that was sort of legal, accounting, you know, HR, but also that, you know, there was the funding there. That said, it did come with huge pressure and the sort of weight of expectation, because I've said to my fellow board members and employees, you know, hey, your potential bonus at the end of the year is probably going to be lower because we're trying to launch a business in the US. So that was tough. And the thing about a startup versus an acquisition is, with a startup, you get to set the culture, you get to set the direction, but it's a lot slower. And obviously, doing it organic with an acquisition, you obviously acquire a culture and everything associated with that, but it supercharges your growth. And I think when we started, we thought, right, that's acquisitions potentially a route we want to go down. But by the end of I remember this, 6 months into my time, I went back for my sister's wedding, and I remember sitting in the UK, and I remember sitting on the plane coming back to the US and thinking, gosh, I don't want to go back. This is so hard. What's going on? Like, what am I doing? Was this the right choice? Like, shall I hand the keys to someone else? And, that was a sort of a moment of doubt. And I thought, oh God, maybe we should buy someone that will sort everything else out. But we stuck to our guns, trusted the process, and we've seen incredible growth since then. So funding wise, I've had an incredibly supportive team, incredibly supportive board, but beside me, and we all went into this as a collective. And one of my big things is, you've got to bring people with you, and whether that's someone you're working with on a project, or your CEO, or your fellow board members, you've got to build the value of what you're doing and bring them along with you, because they don't live it day to day with you. And you also, on the flip side of that, is you can't expect people to care as much as you do. So you've got to bring them with you on that journey. And I think that's really, really important. So funding wise, we're good at the moment, profitable, doing well, sort of wiping our own face in the US, which is great. But I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the incredible support of our UK operation.
No, a lot of people don't realize, right, that burn rate is a real thing. So looking at it from a growth perspective, bringing on the right talent, paying them well, and then becoming profitable, right? And there is a certain expectation in business, and years can be turned into, or months can be turned into years sometimes. And like you said, you have to have those tough conversations, especially when you're breaking into markets and you don't know exactly how much you're going to need. But daily quantifiable KPIs and looking at the metrics is certainly a big deal. So, as we wrap up the conversation, George, you've shared so many different things, and the Go for CEO community, we love to end with CEO, right? So CEO is client engagement or experience, right? Of what it is that they're going to go through from a value proposition perspective, and what you share with them in, let's say, 60 seconds. Then it's engagements, thinking about how did you engage with your employees, your vendors, the people that you work with, the UK team, all that stuff. And the last one's operational excellence. And I'll repeat that, but client experience, give us kind of a high level, what do people, or what can people expect from a client experience?
So I think, above all, what you can expect from Branded is a partner that's reliable, responsive, and all in, and fundamentally does everything to brand to deliver on shelf, in hand, at scale. And we exist in the real world. And I want to recognize that we understand pressures are high, timelines are tight, but fundamentally, results matter. And I always remember that you have no divine right to new business. As someone like, who I'm sat here, you have no divine right to new business, and there is no substitute for hard work. There is absolutely no substitute for hard work. When your head hits the pillow at the end of the day, if you think, right, I've done everything I can, you'll be very happy in your business life. There are things you can't control. There are sort of macro changes you can't control, but but from a client perspective, it's about driving results through distinctive creative. It's about customer service that's reliable, responsive, and all in. And fundamentally looking at this not just as a one-off, but as a longer term partnership. And I'm really proud of the fact that the clients that we have onboarded and that we work with now all have the makings, or have already become really long-term partners for us, which is exciting.
I love it. Well, engagement is next. I always think, as a leader, what are you doing for retreats, Are you using time off to be able to connect with your people? Do you get away, right? Do you allow your people to get away when they truly are on PTO and paid time off and all that type of stuff? And engagement with vendors, and like you have that team back in UK. What are some of the cool things that you do that I guess stand out from an engagement perspective from your leadership side?
So from an engagement perspective, I think commercially, and I'm talking about whether it's negotiating contracts or talking, to employees or other people, is everything has to be win-win. I think there's this major misconception in negotiation where if you win and they lose, you've won. Well, ultimately, that doesn't help anyone because they're going to be angry. They're not going to want to work with you. So looking at everything in the lens of win-win has been really important to me. And from an employee perspective, I spoke earlier about this notion of sort of leading with humanity. I'll be very open, I'll be very honest with my team, but I also recognize, that I'll also be vulnerable at times. I'll tell them how I'm feeling. How's this? I want them to have that environment where they can do that. And in terms of, you spoke about retreats and stuff like that, for me, culture is not fancy retreats. Culture is not foosball tables. It's not snazzy drinks, dinners, nights out. Culture is building an environment where you can look left and right at your employees and say, wow, they really want to be here as much as I do. Because there's an amazing quote, I think the Da Vinci said, which was, people of accomplishment rarely sat back and let things happen to them. They went out and happened to things. And I say that to my team the whole time. It's like, if we're going out and we're making things happen and we're all in this together and we have this shared collective responsibility, that's when amazing things happen. And of course, let's celebrate the wins. I remember our first sort of going for a drink with Layla when we sort of landed the exciting GameStop job, and her and I sat there sort of as a two person social, but just sort of reflecting, but also be very open and honest about the losses and the learnings from there. I think that's really, really important, because if you build a culture of collective accountability, people really feel bought in.
Well, Go for Sale community, that was a raw take right there from George, and sharing the engagement part doesn't always have to be the frills and spills and all these little quirky things, right? He gets real with his people and hands, a locked in type of mindset with elbow to elbow, shoulder to shoulder in the fight together. So really awesome stuff. Last one is operational excellence, George. So when you think about the tools, you mentioned AI a little bit earlier. What are some of the things, the tools that are changing and have stayed consistent also with Branded on how you guys execute in the marketplace?
So AI, and let's tackle it head on. I think AI for scale is and efficiency is amazing. It's as a tool. So, for example, if we're working with a brand, that upfront creativity, absolutely, in my opinion, wholeheartedly should be human led. And for all the reasons I spoke about in terms of creating that originality, that emotional connection, everything like that. But as the brand starts to scale over multiple touch points, AI is an incredible tool to execute those ideas, across multi different touch points. So, for example, automation. We're working on a project that's across X amount of SKUs, and actually there's not much difference in terms of kind of color change. How can you automate that? How can you make that quicker for your client to be able to get to market? So automation is a big tool. I think as well, from the perspective of more of the upfront, I think, like, process, and systems. Like, you always fall to the level of your systems, you don't rise to the level of your goals. And what I mean by that is you've got to have great processes in place, you've got to have clear efficiencies, organization, and you've got to recognize that everything needs to be embedded in an overall picture. If the client says to you, right, we need to launch by this date, what's the timeline? Let's communicate that, let's work towards that. And that's really, really important, because often you hear of creative jobs sort of taking too much time, doing this, doing that, and keeping everyone on that shared accountability.
So are there any favorites, just to go a little bit deeper, from, let's say, a CRM or from a flow chart perspective? Like, what are some of the tools that in your space really make a difference? If you
So I
can name.
think, yeah. So some of the Adobe tools, the AI tools that they're rolling out, are great. I think if you want to do quick quick, quick and easy sort of design activation work. Canva's, a great tool to use in terms of CRMs. I'm a big HubSpot fan. I think it's got a great user experience. And then we have more sort of, and this is probably too niche for the community here, but more sort of like down the line, like product management systems, sort of artwork management systems, and similar like that. But I think if you have a stack that can help you scale content, that's really important. Help you manage client relationships is really important, and then manage, the sort of the overall process of an end-to-end concept to consumer job or project. That's really important.
All right. So I don't usually do this, but I do have some questions, and I think it'll be cool to kind of end with this. So for founders who think branding is just design, what's the biggest misconception you want them to unlearn?
Wow, finishing with the big questions. It's as I said, like, speaking earlier, there's that classic one that you'll hear thrown around is marketing is asking someone on a date. Branding is the reason they say yes. And I think, when I think about like design and I think about, branding, ultimately branding is how you show up everywhere. It's how you feel. And it's not about quick and easy. As I said, it's about what lasts, and it's about those distinctive assets. It's not just a logo, because in isolation, what's a logo? It's how everything comes together. And what it ultimately is I'd think of branding as your competitive advantage. Branding as a competitive advantage for you and your business will help you stand out, it'll help you scale, and ultimately it'll help you dominate the competition. Because if you tap into consumer need through your branding, if you really shout your incredible story from all of your consumer touch points, that's a competitive advantage. It's not just a, right, I've got a product, because guess what? Some of the best products in the world don't have good brands, and some of the worst products in the world have great brands. And that's something that's really interesting. There are lots of products I could name which have incredible brands, which I don't like as products, but because of the brand world and because of the excitement, the energy, the story, the provenance that they've built around that, that's the emotional connection. Design for design's sake will never replace the idea of building an emotional connection with consumers, and that emotional connection will result in repeat business and ultimate growth for your business.
I mean, there's a drink that I'll never have my kids ever drink, which is Prime. I mean, what about that's an incredible brand that created through the Paul brothers, right? Prime, and what a horrible drink, in my opinion, for your kids to drink. But it's incredible to see how they just fly off the shelf, and people drink it all the time. And I see kids doing it, but you're right. They've
I mean,
created.
I mean, John, I would actually disagree with that. I would
Oh, okay.
disagree and say it's not a good brand build, because the foundation of the brand is an influencer. And if you look at the
Oh, okay.
numbers, the joke going around now is it should be called subprime, because it launched at 2 billion sales. I think the sales now are down in the low hundreds of millions. So it had this
Oh, wow.
incredible
Okay.
launch, but it's sort of fallen off. And that's because the foundation of that brand was two influencers who were able to use their incredible network and their incredible reach. But ultimately, what did the product and what did the brand resonate with consumers? What was the need state that they were solving? And their consumer set, which was young children, have aged out. They've moved on. Things have changed, and they haven't stayed relevant for that consumer. So I would argue at first it was a great opportunity and a great activation, but will that brand stand the test of time if it doesn't shift its positioning? Well, I'll leave that up to you to decide.
No, that. You know what? That's a great learning experience right there. From my perspective, being a layman, you see the incredible sales just soar, right? But you don't realize that, oh, wow, you know, obviously the product itself, in my opinion, was horrible. But like you said, it's really been the tangibility of that consumer and who do they attach themselves to with the two brothers and all that stuff. So I love that perspective, and thank you so much for sharing that. All right, so how can people get a hold of you? What's the best way to interact with you? When you attract someone through this video and through the ways that you market, what do they have to do to contact you?
So the best way to reach me is on LinkedIn. So George Essex, Senior Vice President of Branded. Feel free to message me, connect with me. Any questions, big or small. I think I'm so lucky to do what I do, to work on in brands where I walk into Whole Foods and be like, hey, we did that, or that's really cool. So, I love the space that we're in, and I have a real passion and energy for it. And I'd love to meet people who are maybe starting their first journey into the world of branding, looking for a career in branding and design. All of those things, reach out to me. And then if you want to learn more about our company, you can visit our website. So branded-agency.com.
Well, Go for CEO community, I am very, very impressed by George and what he's been able to build. And community, support this video, like it, smash it, subscribe, share it out to everybody. What a cool thing to have a maiden voyage for podcasting for George to come onto the Go for CEO channel. And by the way, my book is live. The 4A Formula, Untangle Any Challenge and Think Like a CEO, with all the hundreds of interviews that I've had, my own experiences as an entrepreneur and an entrepreneur in my life. I hope that you'll enjoy it. It's on Amazon now. Go order it. The 4A Formula. So thanks so much, George, for being on the Go for CEO channel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John.